I'm Caroline Simpkins, a former ballerina turned researcher, and today's episode is the third and final part in a series on ballet and fall prevention, the main focus of my research. In part one, we explored the importance of fall prevention in older adults and examined how fundamental aspects of ballet training, such as balance and muscular strength, may contribute to reducing fall risk. Part 2 presented a pilot study comparing the responses of professional ballet dancers and non-dancers to unexpected balance disturbances, specifically simulated standing slips. As a quick review, the findings from this pilot study indicated that professional ballet dancers demonstrated better stability, more effective backward recovery steps, and enhanced trunk control compared to non-dancers in response to slips during standing. If you haven't had a chance to listen to parts 1 and 2 yet, I recommend going back and checking those out first. It will help this episode make a lot more sense and give you the full picture of how everything connects. In today's third and final episode, I'll share the findings of my dissertation research, which investigated fall risk among older adult ballet dancers. This brings our discussion full circle, highlighting how ballet training may support fall prevention across the lifespan. Let's take a quick step back and review. Falls and the injuries that come with them are a big concern for older adults. They're not just physically harmful, they can also lead to high medical bills and a noticeable drop in quality of life. And with the number of older adults growing quickly, finding ways to prevent falls is becoming more and more important. Now, traditional exercise programs have definitely been shown to help reduce the risk of falling, but they're not perfect. Some can be pretty physically demanding or, let's be honest, just plain boring, which makes it tough for people to stick with them. That's actually a big part of the problem. Almost 60% of older adults in the US don't get the recommended amount of daily physical activity. So if we really want to support healthy, active aging, we need exercise options that are not only effective, but also fun and engaging. Something people actually enjoy and want to keep doing, not just because they should, but because they want to. There's some exciting research emerging around dance-based programs as a fun and effective way to help prevent falls in older adults. Unlike some traditional exercise routines, these programs often get high marks for participant satisfaction and have lower dropout rates. That's likely because dance brings together so many appealing elements: movement, music, social connection, and even a bit of creative expression. Studies have shown that dance can help tackle several key fall risk factors like muscle weakness, limited endurance, and poor balance. And these benefits aren't just limited to healthy older adults. They've been seen in people with clinical conditions too. Among the different styles of dance, ballet is starting to stand out for its potential to improve strength, balance, and overall postural control. Building on that, researchers have begun looking more closely at how structured, well-designed dance programs, especially ballet, might support older adults' health. For example, one recent study explored the effects of a 12-week virtual ballet program compared to a general wellness class, focusing on things like walking ability and balance in older women. Both groups improved, but the ballet group did better on more challenging tasks like walking backward or multitasking while walking. That said, the study was done entirely online, so we still don't know how in-person ballet classes might compare. To help fill that gap, another small study looked at a 10-week in-person ballet program. Participants showed gains in balance and leg strength, but since there wasn't a control group or comparison group, it's hard to say for sure whether ballet was the key factor. So while the early findings are definitely encouraging, there's still a lot we don't know. We need more rigorous research, especially randomized controlled trials, to really understand ballet's potential for reducing fall risk. And perhaps just as importantly, we need to find out whether recreational ballet taught in typical community settings, rather than under strict lab intervention conditions, could offer those same benefits on a larger scale. And that's exactly the question my dissertation project aimed to explore. As I've mentioned before, I've spent a lot of time teaching ballet to people of all ages and experience levels. but one of my most rewarding parts of my teaching career has been working with adults. What many people don't realize is that lots of ballet schools actually offer weekly classes for adults who want to dance, not just kids and teens. And these adult students come from all sorts of backgrounds. Some are former professional dancers, others took ballet as kids and are getting back into it, and many are trying it for the first time as a new and fulfilling hobby. Teaching adult ballet has been especially meaningful to me. Week after week, I saw firsthand how my students improved in things like balance, strength, and coordination, all key factors when it comes to preventing falls. These real-life observations really stuck with me and ended up playing a big role in shaping the direction of my research. After finishing a pilot study that looked at how professional ballet dancers react to sudden balance challenges, which I talked about in last week's episode, I started thinking back to my time teaching adult ballet. I wondered, could recreational ballet offer similar benefits for older adults? That question became the starting point for my dissertation project, which is called the Neurobiomechanical Mechanisms of Ballet Preventing Falls in Older Adults. The goal of the study was to see how regular ballet training might influence fall risk in older adults, especially compared to peers who are active but don't dance. More specifically, I wanted to find out how older adults with ballet experience respond to unexpected slips during treadmill standing and walking compared to older non-dancers. To do this, I recruited 43 healthy adults aged 50 and up, 20 with ballet experience, and 23 without any formal dance background. To be in the ballet group, participants had to be taking at least one ballet class per week, at least 60 minutes long, for the past 3 months or more. The non-dancers didn't have any ballet or formal dance experience, though many were still active in other ways. Everyone in the study had to meet the same health criteria: no serious neurological or musculoskeletal issues, no lower body fractures in the past 3 months, and no prior experience with balance training that included slip or trip perturbations. That last point was important. We wanted to make sure participants hadn't been exposed to the kind of balance tests we were going to use in this project, so we could get a clear picture of their natural responses. As I mentioned in last week's episode, the biomechanics lab where I ran these experiments is equipped with some pretty advanced technology, including a 9-camera Vicon 3D motion capture system. If that sounds familiar, it's because similar systems are used in the film and gaming industries, when actors wear those suits covered in little reflective dots. That same concept applies here. For this study, we placed reflective markers on key points across each participant's body, like their arms, legs, torso, and head, so we could capture exactly how their body moved during the experiment. The camera system tracked the 3D movement of each marker, giving us an incredibly detailed picture of how people reacted when they experienced a sudden, unexpected slip. This allowed us to closely compare how ballet dancers and non-dancers responded to these kinds of balance challenges. To simulate those slips, we used a special treadmill system combined with an overhead arch and safety harness. The setup was very similar to what I used in my earlier study with professional ballet dancers. Once participants were suited up with the markers and securely harnessed in, they stepped onto the treadmill to begin the trials. Now, before we started, participants were told that at some point while either standing still or walking on the treadmill, they might experience a slip. But we didn't tell them when or if it would happen. That unpredictability was a key part of the study. After all, real-life slips and falls don't come with a warning, right? One major difference between this study and my earlier pilot work with younger ballet dancers was that we included slips during both standing and walking. In that earlier study, we only tested balance reactions while standing. But since most slips in daily life happen while people are walking, it was important to look at both situations this time around. So here's how it worked. First, participants completed a series of standing slip trials. There were 16 of these, mixed in with 11 non-slip trials. In each trial, they stood still on the treadmill while wearing the markers and harness. In some trials, the treadmill suddenly moved to create a slip. In others, they expected a slip that never came. Each of these trials lasted about 10 seconds and began with a short countdown to get them ready. This mix of expected and unexpected trials helped us keep things unpredictable, just like real life. After finishing the standing portion, we moved on to walking. Participants did 3 short warm-up walks, about 10 seconds each, to get comfortable walking on the treadmill. Then, just like before, we let them know a slip might happen while they were walking, but we didn't say when. Each participant then experienced one unexpected walking slip, which we called a gait slip, which finished up the testing. If you're trying to picture what these slips felt like, here are a couple of everyday comparisons that might help. The standing slips are kind of like when you're on a bus or a train and it suddenly jerks forward. You feel your balance shift and have to quickly adjust your footing. The walking slips are more like stepping on an icy patch while walking, so you don't see it coming and suddenly your foot slides out, forcing you to react quickly to avoid falling. By capturing detailed motion data during both types of slips, we were able to compare how older ballet dancers responded compared to non-dancers. These insights are helping us understand whether ballet training might give people an edge when it comes to balance recovery, and potentially lower their risk of falling in everyday life. Before we jump into the results, I want to quickly revisit 2 key concepts that played a big role in this study: reaction and adaptation. These are really central to how we analyze the data. One of the most important things we looked at was how participants responded to their very first slip. Why the first one? Well, think about it. Real-life falls usually happen without warning, so that initial reaction when the slip is completely unexpected gives us the best look at someone's natural ability to recover their balance. As we discussed in the pilot study with professional ballet dancers last week, that first response is probably the most accurate reflection of how someone might react to a sudden loss of balance out in the real world. But we didn't stop there. We also looked at adaptation, basically how people changed or improved their responses over time. In this study, all participants went through 16 standing slip trials, but for today's discussion, we're just going to focus on what happened during the first 5 trials. We wanted to see whether people got better at catching themselves, and if so, how their strategy evolved. Let's start with what happened during that very first standing slip. One of the main things we tracked was fall rate. How many people in each group fell in response to the slip? Now you might be thinking, wait, weren't they in harnesses? How can you tell if they would have actually fallen? That is a great question. To figure that out, we used a piece of equipment called a load cell, which was built into the overhead harness. It measures how much force someone puts into the harness during a slip. So if a person basically drops all their weight down into the harness, that tells us they would have likely hit the ground without it, and that counts as a fall. But if they catch themselves quickly with only a little support from the harness and not putting much weight down into the load cell, that's considered a non-fall. When we compare the 2 groups, the results were pretty striking. In the non-dancer group, 83% of participants experienced a fall on that first slip. In contrast, only 45% of the ballet dancers were classified as falling. That's a huge difference, and it really speaks to the potential benefits of ballet training when it comes to reactive balance and fall prevention. But it wasn't just about who fell and who didn't. We also looked closely at how well participants recovered when they started to slip, especially their backward recovery steps. We analyzed 2 key moments: the step lift-off, when the foot first lifts off to take a recovery step, and the step touchdown when it lands again. Across several different measurements, the ballet dancers consistently outperformed the non-dancers. They were able to start their recovery step faster, shown by a shorter step latency, and they also completed the step more quickly and efficiently, shown by a shorter step duration and a faster step speed. Basically, the dancers reacted faster and moved more effectively than the non-dancers to regain their balance. We also dug into what was happening inside the body during those moments by collecting electromyography or EMG data, which tracks muscle activity. Using 8 wireless electrodes attached to the skin, we recorded signals from 4 key leg muscles on each side. The rectus femoris and biceps femoris, basically the front and back of the thigh, and the tibialis anterior and medial gastrocnemius, which are basically the front and back of the lower leg. The main thing we looked at here was EMG latency, or how quickly the muscles activated in response to the slip. Again, the ballet dancers had the edge. They showed shorter EMG latencies in both legs, meaning their muscles kicked in more quickly after the slip started. That faster neuromuscular response likely helped them stay on their feet. So those were the big takeaways from the very first standing slip. Now let's shift to what happened over time, specifically how participants adapted across the first 5 standing slips. What we found was pretty interesting. The ballet dancers improved more quickly than the non-dancers. On that first slip, 45% of dancers were classified as falling, but by the 5th slip, that number had dropped to just 15%. In the non-dancer group, the fall rate also went down from 83% to 57%, but not as sharply. So while both groups were learning and adjusting, the dancers adapted faster. We also looked at changes in stability between the first and 5th slips, and again, the dancers showed stronger improvements. One area where this really stood out was in the duration of the recovery step. For the dancers, their recovery steps got longer, which suggests that they were adjusting their strategy, maybe giving themselves more time and space to regain their balance as they became more familiar with the slip. Another key difference had to do with the trunk control. Over the 5 trials, the dancers maintained a much more upright posture at the end of their recovery step. The non-dancers, on the other hand, actually leaned farther backward by the 5th slip compared to their first. That backward lean could indicate a lack of trunk stability, whereas the dancers seemed to hold onto better alignment and control throughout all 5 slips. Now, let's talk about what happened during the walking slip, or what we call the gait slip. Once again, the ballet dancers came out ahead. Only 13% of them were classified as fallers during the walking slip, compared to 43% in the non-dancer group. The dancers also showed more stable landings during their recovery steps. They stepped out further and faster, which points to a stronger and more effective response. When we looked at their trunk movement, the dancers had less backward trunk velocity at the moment their recovery foot hit the treadmill. In other words, they had better control of their upper body, which is a big part to avoiding a fall. And finally, our EMG data, which tells us how quickly muscles respond, backed all of this up. The dancers had shorter EMG latencies in all 4 of the leg muscles we tracked on the recovery leg side. That means their muscles kicked in faster in response to the slip, giving them a neuromuscular edge when it came to reacting and regaining their balance. So what do all these results from the standing walking slips actually tell us? Well, the big takeaway is this. The older adults with ballet training had significantly fewer falls than the non-dancers, not just during the first standing slip, but also during the walking slip. That tells us they were better at reacting to unexpected balance challenges right from the start. But there's more. The ballet dancers didn't just start out stronger, they also got better faster. Over the first 5 standing slips, their fall rate dropped more quickly than it did for the non-dancers, which suggests they were adapting more effectively to the repeated slips. In short, ballet dancers showed both stronger initial responses and faster learning when it came to staying on their feet during sudden slips. So what is it about ballet training that might be driving these results? Well, just like we saw with the younger professional dancers, the older ballet dancers in this study were able to take more effective recovery steps in the backward direction than the non-dancers. And that's a big deal because those quick, confident steps are key to staying upright when your balance is suddenly lost. One possible reason: ballet dancers spend a lot of time practicing movements that go backward, something that most people don't do much in daily life. And that repetition in class might make them more comfortable and confident when stepping backward quickly, especially in a high-stakes moment like a sudden slip. Alternatively, the non-dancers likely don't have that same kind of experience. Since most of our day-to-day movement, like walking, is done going forward, they may not be as practiced or prepared to take a fast, controlled step backward. That could explain why their recovery steps were slower and started later than the dancers. And it might even put them at a greater risk for backward falls during slip simulations. A big part of why the dancers did better at recovering their balance after the repeated standing slips and the slip during walking comes down to how well they controlled their trunk movement, basically how they kept their upper body stable. When you slip backward, it's really important to avoid tipping your upper body too far back. Keeping the trunk upright helps you stay balanced and prevents a full fall. Strong core and trunk control lets you keep your body weight more forward, right where it needs to be to counteract the slip. So why might ballet dancers have this edge in trunk control? Ballet training focuses a lot on keeping an upright posture with your weight centered over the balls of your feet. This helps dancers move smoothly, change direction efficiently, and keep their legs aligned properly. Plus, ballet requires constant engagement of the core muscles, so dancers probably have stronger cores overall. That said, though, we did not collect data on core muscle activity, like EMG measurements we took in the legs, so we can't say for sure that this is what is going on. But it's a reasonable guess that ballet helps build the kind of core strength that supports better trunk control during slips. Now, I want to take a moment to give you a clearer picture of the people in our dancer and non-dancer groups. I'm guessing some of you are wondering how often these older ballet dancers actually went to class and how long they'd been sticking with that routine. This is a great question. So for the 20 people in the dancer group, they typically took ballet classes about 2 to 3 times a week, and each class lasted between 60 to 90 minutes, pretty standard for a traditional ballet class. On average, they had been maintaining that schedule for around 6 years, but there was quite a bit of variety. Some had only been training for about 6 months, while others had been doing it for over 12 years. It's also worth noting that ballet wasn't their only form of exercise. Many of them were also regularly doing other activities like yoga, strength training, walking, running, or cycling. The frequency of those activities ranged from once a week to daily. Now, what about the non-dancers? This group was also physically active. They engaged in things like walking, Pilates, golf, strength training, and even pickleball on a weekly basis. Along with telling me about the types of physical activities they did each week, all participants, both dancers and non-dancers, also filled out a quick questionnaire that scored their weekly exercise habits on a scale from 0 to 10. A score of 0 basically means not active at all, while a 10 means someone who's super active and hitting all the exercise marks, cardio, strength, and flexibility. As you might expect, the dancers did score a little higher overall, meaning they were a bit more active on average. But it's important to point out that both groups were made up of older adults who were physically active. This wasn't a situation where we were comparing dancers to people who hardly moved. Both groups were regularly engaged in physical activity. And that's a key detail, because we know that being more physically active in general is linked to a lower risk of falling. So if we had compared super active dancers to completely sedentary non-dancers, it would have been hard to tell whether the better slip responses were due to ballet specifically or just being more active overall. But since both groups were active and the dancers still performed better in these slip tests, it gives us a stronger reason to believe that something about ballet itself, maybe the balance training, the posture, the movement patterns, is really helping improve those reactions to slips. There are a few important limitations to keep in mind with this study. First off, all the participants were healthy older adults, so we can't say for sure how these findings would apply to people with movement disorders like Parkinson's, multiple sclerosis, stroke, or those with cognitive impairments. It's still unclear how ballet might help or not in those groups. Second, it's important to point out that most of the participants in this study were female. Only 3 out of 20 dancers and 4 out of 23 non-dancers were male. So there's definitely an imbalance in terms of sex. Ideally, future studies would aim for a more balanced sample between males and females to make these findings more generalizable, but recruiting participants with an even sex distribution was a challenge this time around. Third, we only looked at muscle activation timing, that EMG latency, in 4 leg muscles. That means we don't know if other muscles, like those in the trunk, behave differently between dancers and non-dancers when they slip. And finally, even though participants did 16 standing slips during the study, today I only talked about the first 5. That's because only the data from those first 5 slips has been peer-reviewed and published so far, so I wanted to stick with what's officially out there already. So to wrap things up, this was the first study to look at how older adults who take recreational ballet respond to unexpected slips, both while standing and walking on a treadmill. And the results are pretty exciting. The ballet dancers had noticeably fewer falls and were more stable than the non-dancers when they experienced that first unexpected slip while standing. This improved stability likely means they were better equipped to handle losing their balance, thanks to quicker leg reactions and more effective recovery steps. On top of that, the dancers also adapted more quickly over repeated slips, which suggests ballet training might actually help people learn how to respond better to balance challenges over time. And then when it came to the walking slip, the dancers once again outperformed the non-dancers, showing better control and a lower chance of falling. All in all, these findings give us some early but promising evidence that ballet training could be a useful and targeted way to help older adults improve balance and reduce fall risk, especially for those who may already be at risk for balance issues. The data discussed in today's episode are published in peer-reviewed scientific journals. I will include full citations and links to those publications in the show notes for those interested in exploring the research further. I would also like to take this opportunity to sincerely thank my co-authors for their invaluable contributions to this research project, as well as the 43 people who generously volunteered to participate in my dissertation study. If you happen to be listening, thank you again. And that wraps up our 3-part series on ballet and fall prevention. We've explored a lot, from why falls are such a big concern to how research is working to address the issue, and finally, how emerging studies suggest that ballet training might actually help reduce the risk of falling in both younger and older adults. The early results are definitely promising, but there's still more to uncover about how ballet fits into the bigger picture of fall prevention. That said, wherever you are in life, I hope this inspires you to check out a ballet class in your community. You might just find it's a fun and uplifting way to stay steady on your feet. And thank you for joining me today for the Ballet Science Podcast. Whether you are a dancer, teacher, student, or simply curious about the mechanics behind movement, I appreciate you being here today. Each week, we will explore the intersection of science and ballet, from injury prevention and biomechanics to nutrition, mindset, and everything in between. If you enjoyed this episode, please follow this podcast, leave a review, and share it with your friends and dance community. If there are specific topics you'd like to hear about in the future episodes, feel free to share them in the comments below. You can also follow Ballet Science on social media and visit our website at ballet.science for additional information. Thank you again for tuning in, and I look forward to seeing you next time on the Ballet Science Podcast.